In this video I'm going to show you how you can insert a screw dislocation into a crystal. I'm going to use the example of calcium carbonate to demonstrate this. This is an ionic crystal and so we will need a net simulation, but the first important thing to understand is something about the structure file. In particular, if we look at this part of the structure file here, where we give the unit cell alpha, beta, gamma, A, B, C. Now there are two sets of data here. The top set of data here, the ABC at 6.3751, is for the primitive cell. This is the cell in which the calculation is going to be done. Indeed, it's the way the calculation is always done, whether you have a screw dislocation or not. Below is non-primitive data. This is data which is usually used for displaying the crystal afterwards, and it would be the way you would colour it. These would be the facets which you will use for colouring. This is slightly different if you insert a screw dislocation. First of all, if you colour it, it will not use the non-primitive data. It will actually colour it according to the primitive data. So that's one thing you have to be careful of if you do want to do any colouring, and you have to be very careful if you're colouring with screw dislocations. In fact, very often you don't colour. But if you're colouring, you will be using facets in the primitive cell. Nonetheless, the non-primitive data, which is the way we normally think about the crystal, is used for inserting the direction of the screw core. So when you're inserting the screw core, you should think about it in terms of the non-primitive cell, the normal unit cell. This makes it a bit easier to think about. However, I could, if I want, display calcium carbonate slightly differently. So what we have here is we have an R-centered cell, and consequently the primitive and the non-primitive are different to one another. But I could quite as easily construct over here a different structure file for calcium carbonate, whereby I simply repeat the primitive cell down here, and I just say that this is actually just a primitive unit cell, even in the non-primitive. Although this is not correct, it actually serves a useful purpose sometimes, because now the colouring and the direction of the screw core is actually the same as one another. So when we come to do the calculation, I'll refer to this as the non-primitive structure file, and I'll refer to this one over here as the primitive structure file. Okay, we're going to have a net structure, so first of all we're going to browse for the structure file. So I'll start with the non-primitive structure file and read that in. We then need to find our energy file and read that in. I'm just going to set all the energies here equal to one another for the sake of argument. And then you're going to be asked the question, do you wish to insert a screw dislocation? And we'll say yes here, and when we do that we get the screw dislocation option showing up over here. Okay, for this one we can, I'm not going to save a checkpoint file. I'm going to do a normal simulation, and I'm going to find somewhere to save the data, so I'll save it into this place here, and we'll call that calcite screw. I'm going to do 1 million iterations for now. We'll make a movie here, so I'll do 50 frames of a movie, and we will run in mode 3, and we start with a supersaturation very high just to seed it, and then after 500,000 iterations, it will drop down over a period of 100,000 iterations. Net options, we've got one interaction set at 5 kcal per mole, that will do for now. Then we're going to have the screw dislocation that we're interested in. So I'm going to look at the 1, 0, 0 screw dislocation. So the first 3 here give you the direction of the screw core, and these all need to be integers. They can be negative integers. Then we've got the translation, the fraction of the unit cell which is displaced for the screw core. Now this can always be set equal to an integer because that will always work. You can always have a Burger's displacement of 1 unit cell in any direction, because the structure will always repeat after 1 unit cell or 2 unit cells or 3 unit cells. You can also have a fractional displacement here, but you can only have a fractional displacement if that is consistent with the structure. That is, for example, let's suppose I put half there, there would have to be a repeat of the structure with exactly the same structural unit, a half a unit cell in the direction 1, 0, 0. That's not the case in this particular structure, but I'll show you in a moment also how you can do that with fractional coordinates. We've then got 3 components here which will allow you to shift the screw core, and that's useful because sometimes it's good to have the screw core actually emanating directly out from a face, and I know for this particular one we do have to shift it a little bit, otherwise we won't see it. It'll go right through the corner of the crystal. So I'm going to shift it in the B and the C direction. Very often you don't have to do any shifting here, you can just leave all these as 0. And for this simple one I'm going to not do any colouring, so I'm going to say no to colouring, and when we've done all that we can run the program. So that's going to output 50 frames over the 1 million iterations. And then we fast forward through to the end of the simulation that is now complete. So if we open up a Veto now and we load up the result which we just found, so just navigate to that latest file and open it up. We'll find this is the result, and we have a movie here, and it's a little bit difficult to see the screw dislocation here, so we're just going to change things around a little bit. So sometimes it's first of all useful to colour this with just one colour, so we just assign a colour here, and I'll turn the simulation cell off, and we can actually see the screw dislocation here. I'm going to go to my particles and I'm just going to make them slightly larger just to so we can see this a little bit better. Okay, we can see the screw here emanating from the crystal at this point here, and in fact it goes through the crystal and it comes out over here. So this is an interesting screw dislocation. It's not running perpendicular to the facet of the crystal, it's going at an angle, but often screw dislocations do exactly that. So if we just play the movie, you can see at the beginning we've got lots of nucleation, so we've got layer by layer growth, and then eventually we come in towards equilibrium and we can see the screw dislocation at the end there. Another way that you can do this is to first of all grow a large checkpointed file, and because it's slower to do the calculation with a screw dislocation, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grow a crystal without a screw dislocation to begin with, and I'm going to save a checkpointed file, and we'll grow one with 10 million iterations here. I don't want to record a movie, so I'll turn that off. I'll do it in mode 3, and now I'm going to run for 8 million at high supersaturation, and then I'll let it run down towards equilibrium. So I'll grow a large checkpointed file. I've lost the screw dislocation option here because I'm running without a screw dislocation. So I'll just run that checkpointed file now. That simulation is now coming to completion and we've recorded the checkpointed file. I go back to Avito and I open up the checkpointed file which we just recorded here. Okay, so much larger file, but it's got no screw dislocation in it, and we're going to actually insert a screw dislocation into this file and continue growing. So coming back to our structure options, now what we're going to do is we're going to not save a checkpointed file, but we are going to load a checkpoint file. So I need to browse to find the last simulation here we've just done and find the checkpoint file and read in the checkpoint file. So that's now done, and I'm going to go back and insert the screw, and that has actually saved the previous data. So we're going to go along 100, displacement of 1 unit cell and an offset of 0, 10 and 8. We're going to change the supersaturation profile because we already have a crystal growing, so I'm just going to have a constant supersaturation. I'll put this as a fairly low supersaturation, let's say 2 kilocalories per mole, and that's what we should grow on top of the crystal which we were just growing. So this time we'll just grow for say 3 million iterations. Because we've got a checkpointed file, we'll have to insert the size of the box which we want. I'll just make sure we've got enough space, so I'll put say 451 for each of these values in there. This is just to make sure it's a little bit larger than we had before so that it can grow. And we'll make a movie, and that movie can have 50 frames, can run from the beginning until the end. And so we'll run that simulation now. Then fast forwarding through to the end of the simulation, go to the 50th frame and we've completed that simulation. Going back to Avito, then we can open up the simulation that we've just done. And here we have the simulation. At the beginning of the simulation it looks a little bit odd because you have these straight lines running to the screw core here and also down here. That's because we don't. This is essentially the original crystal growing without a screw dislocation. We've inserted a screw dislocation, but the connectivity is actually not correct. So what we do now is, as the screw core grows, the crystal actually heals itself and the crystal grows correctly. I can just go back and have a look at the first couple of frames. If I just play the first couple of frames, you'll see bit by bit that screw core heals itself, and then the simulation can continue. So what you want to be careful is not to use the information just from the first few frames, or what I would normally do is actually I would start recording slightly later on in the movie after the structure has healed itself. But the nice thing about doing it this way is that you can grow yourself a large seed crystal with a fast, rapid simulation, because it would take quite a long time to grow that with the screw in place, and then you can do your growth on top. Now I'm going to look at a different screw dislocation in calcite, and that's actually along a different direction, which is the -4, 4, 1 direction. Remember, that's the -4, 4, 1 in the normal unit cell, but the displacement here is only 1/6 of the unit cell, so 0.1666666 will do, and we don't need any displacement for this one at all. We can just run that through the middle because it goes more or less through the center of the face of the crystal, but we can see here we have a fractional unit here. Okay, and then what I'll do there is I will run this one, then running that one through to the end of the simulation. That is now completed. And going back to Avito and opening up the latest simulation, we can see the inserted screw core, which is incorrect at the beginning, but then as that runs, the screw core heals. And what we see in this particular case, for this particular screw running this direction, we actually have a double screw core because the Berger's vector permits a double terrace to emanate from the screw core. But we've used exactly the same seed crystal in order to do this particular calculation. Now if I want to use the other structure file, so if I use the primitive structure file instead, read that one in, then we can do the same calculation, but in this particular case the screw direction will be different. So whereas before we had -441 and 1,6, exactly the same screw core now runs along 0, 1,0 and has a displacement of 1.0. So this should be exactly the same screw core which we recorded in the previous case. And we can run that simulation using exactly the same checkpoint file as they've both been calculated using the primitive cell. So we run that through to completion now. Going back to Avito, open up the latest simulation. And again we can see the inserted screw core there, and we have the double screw just as we had before. So this is the same screw core which we had before, but we're now using the primitive unit cell to define the crystal structure. We're using the screw core defined along the direction associated with the primitive structure. Now if you want to colour this, it's a little bit more complicated than colouring just a normal crystal, because the screw core doesn't lend itself well to colouring. But that's not to say that it can't be coloured, and there is something to be gained from colouring. So if we first of all read in a file for colouring, which I found before, so we read in this one here. These are the 6 facets that you have on the surface of the crystal. Now where the screw core emanates for this particular screw dislocation is on 2 sides of the crystal. That's on the 1 to 1 side, and the opposite, that would be the -1, -2, -1 side. So there really is no point at all to colour those 2 facets, because they have the screw cores on them, and the layer faceting doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. So if we remove those 2 and we save that okay, we just copy that one in here, but we just change the file extension. I'll just call that B and save the changes. So those 2 should be excluded now, and then we're going to use this particular file here, and we're going to use that for colouring the surface. So now we can repeat the calculation which we did before, and then run that calculation through to completion. Now we open up in Avito the last simulation, that we have. And this time we're going to colour it with colour coding on the mass, as we would normally do. Set the range, and now you can see that the side facets have been coloured here, and we can see the simulation. Basically, you can see on the side faceting you have some colour patterns which are a result also of the screw having been inserted. Nonetheless, the colouring can be quite useful sometimes if you want to distinguish between growth at screw dislocations and layer by layer growth. So if we just change the simulation, and if we go here to our simulation options, and here what we're going to do is we're going to do 4 million iterations. We're going to make a movie where we're going to start the movie at 1 million iterations. That's in order to not catch this bit at the beginning when the checkpointed file is actually healing. And we go to our supersaturation profile, and I'm going to set the supersaturation to 0, but now I'm going to have a constant supersaturation, but now I'm going to run with a supersaturation excess, and you'll get this extra tab here, this excess supersaturation, and I'm going to have 3 different periods of supersaturation and generate the fields here. So we've got 3 periods here where I'm going to run with different supersaturations to see at what point I switch on the growth at the layer by layer growth. So with 3 periods there's going to be 2 ends to the period. So the first period will have end at 2 million, and the second period will have end at 3 million. The last period will end at 4 million. And then we'll have an excess driving force for the first section for both carbonate and calcium of 1 kilocalorie per mole. Then we're going to step it up to 2 kilocalories per mole, and then we'll double that to 4 kilocalories per mole. So we're going to have 3 periods. The first one is twice as long, just to allow some healing for the first million, and then the second million we will record a movie, and we'll continue with the movie right to the end of the simulation. So we'll run that now. Skipping to the end of the simulation, then if we look in Avito for the last simulation, okay, so now we can see at the beginning of the simulation we don't have that problem because we've allowed it to heal for 1 million at the beginning. Now we're running at 1 kilocalorie, and then we move to 2 kilocalories, and then finally we move to 4 kilocalories, and we can see when we get to 4 kilocalories we actually switch on the layer by layer growth on the side. So although the colouring is not perfect, we can still see the effect of at low supersaturation only having the growth of the screw core, and then switching on the layer by layer growth at the higher supersaturation.